kind of some of the higher education conversation is the value that I got out of it worth obviously the dollars that, you know, went into it?
People will reach out to me occasionally like, hey, I think I might go to journalism school. Should I do it? And my answer is just like,
Are you seeing any potential for anybody that's starting to compete with you in this space at all?
the hard problem that we think will differentiate us from anyone else who tries to build in this space is
You were like on the early ground floor of like, what is kind of newsletters today? You've seen it evolve, I think, you know, probably a lot.
it initially started as me like sending it to a couple of friends, and then through word of mouth, all of a sudden I had like 20-some thousand subscribers, and I was like every day getting responses from people. I was getting journalists emailing me saying like, can you please include me in your newsletter? And then one day I got a response to the newsletter from Jason Calacanis. He emailed me and he was like, hey, I have this company that I started a while ago. It's called Inside.com. It's a news app, but I want to shut down the app and pivot to newsletters, and I need someone to run it. Like, are you interested in maybe working on this?
Episode 8 of the Roads and Riches podcast. Today we have on Austin Petersmith, the co-founder and CEO of Howie.ai. Howie is the AI tool that has literally changed my life like the last 2 months. Highly recommend you going to check out Howie.ai. Austin has an incredible story. Coming out of school as a journalism major, actually interned for Jon Stewart, and shortly after making a name for himself in the tech world. Today he's building an incredible product, which I'm a huge fan of. And so as soon as I was able to get a hold of him, I had to have him on. Let's get right into it. We're going to talk all things AI, talk about his journey. So hope you enjoy it. Austin, thanks for joining the pod, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for developing something that is kind of changed my life in, the last, I guess, month or so. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But kind of like we were just talking about, we haven't really spent too much time kind of chatting at all, been able to give you some feedback on, what you're building now, which has been awesome. It's been a lot of the beta for Howie and everything, and we'll get to that. But wanted to talk a little bit about your background first and kind of, what you've done over the course of your career, kind of checked out some of the things that you've been involved with. So maybe let's go back and kind of start to like what you studied, I think, coming out of school and everything, and then kind of taking the entrepreneurship route and stuff, and looks like founding, some different companies and getting into, the tech world.
Yeah, totally. I studied communications in undergrad. I went to University of Montana, and I was always interested in kind of storytelling, which is kind of what brought me toward that. And then I went immediately after undergrad, I went to Northwestern University to get my master's in journalism. So again, the kind of storytelling was what I was really drawn to. I've always been just a fan of journalism and the impact that it can have when it's done well. And so I between college and getting my master's in journalism, I worked at the Daily Show with Jon Stewart as an intern, and that like even just got me more excited about it because it was just like such a creative take on kind of breaking down the news for people. Like I as a fan of that show truly was like getting, not as a sole source of news, but like learning a lot about what's happening in the world through the kind of what Jon Stewart would say is like that they like stood in the back of the classroom launching spitballs, and that was really inspiring to me in terms of just like a creative way to participate in this medium that has been around forever. And so went and got my master's in journalism. After that, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was doing like kind of freelance reporting, and I had always been very, very interested in technology and the internet, and had been kind of like extremely online for a long time. And I sort of like, I guess two things were happening at the same time. One, I was like starting to think like, oh shit, why did I just take out this massive amount of student loans to get a master's in a kind of an industry where my earning potential is like extremely, extremely limited. Like the people in my class who got the best jobs were making 42K or something, and that was like a thing to be jealous of. And the student loans were massive, and so I kind of was freaking out about that. And then I literally actually just came across this video. This guy Jeremy Miller, who had created Jabber XMPP, which is the open source technology that powered basically all of instant messaging, AOL Instant Messenger, GChat, and the I think it was called iChat, whatever the Apple chat was, but it was this open source protocol that powered all of that. And he had started this new company trying to like build protocols to open source protocols for personal data. So he was like seeing that with that, like Facebook, Google, they were building these silos of our personal data. And he wanted to build this kind of protocol that lets the data flow between those places. And I was very moved by that idea. And I emailed him and I was like, can I help? And he was like, well, you're a journalist. Like, what do you have in mind? And I ended up flying out to San Francisco. I met him and I was like, and I met their whole team and I was just like, this is awesome. And I really want to help. And so they brought me on as like an intern essentially. But what I ended up doing was it was a developer facing product. And so I ended up doing what's known as developer evangelism, which is basically marketing towards software developers. So I was traveling the country, going to like hackathons and meetups with developers. I was learning to code, getting a ton of exposure to just people that are building things online. And I just immediately like fell in love with it and felt like from the day I arrived in San Francisco, I was just like this Silicon Valley, that energy is this is just like the place where I am meant to be, both like physically, but also just the like the world that where I like finally am like, oh my gosh, I actually can see have clarity about like where I fit in to the world in terms of like where I want to take my career, and really never looked back after that. So I ended up doing kind of developer evangelism, developer marketing, and community building for a couple of different startups. And then in 2015, I started this side project that was called Read This Thing, and it was an email newsletter. Every day I would send a link to one fascinating piece of journalism that I had come across. And it initially started as me like sending it to a couple of friends. And then through word of mouth, all of a sudden I had like 20 some thousand subscribers. And I was like every day getting responses from people. I was getting journalists emailing me saying like, can you please include me in your newsletter? And so it kind of had picked up enough steam that it was actually a thing. Then one day I got a response to the newsletter from Jason Calacanis, who is in Silicon Valley, kind of a well-known dude, podcaster, early investor in Uber, as he likes to remind everybody, and really active angel investor. And he emailed me and he was like, hey, I have this company that I started a while ago. It's called Inside.com. It's a news app, but I want to shut down the app and pivot to newsletters, and I need someone to run it. Like, are you interested in maybe working on this? And so we ended up like spending a bunch of time together, and he offered to kind of acquire my newsletter to bring me on as president and GM at Inside. So I did that, and we built up kind of from my one newsletter to this sort of network of newsletters, dozens of newsletters, millions of subscribers, millions in revenue. Built the kind of the technology to power the newsletters, the CMS and an ad server, and then built up the kind of the editorial side. We had a staff of like 40, 50 writers, and then the sales side, because we were mostly monetizing via ads in the newsletters. And so I did that. And do you want me to just keep rolling through everything?
Dude, this is awesome. So I had no idea that of like your involvement with like JCal, and you know, of course, wildly famous. I would say now almost, especially in kind of like, you know, the tech community and stuff. Obviously with All In Podcast, so huge fan. That's super cool. And you were like on the early, like kind of like the early ground floor of like what is kind of newsletters today. Like you know, you've seen it evolve, I think, you know, probably a lot since those early days. So that's really cool. Going back to like, you know, you went from journalism to like this almost, it sounds like sales role kind of, but like how it's interesting because those two things almost complement each other. You started off by saying like you were super interested in storytelling. It was funny. We had on the group that does a lot of our branding and design work for both our accounting firm and even, you know, working with us a little bit on, you know, starting to develop the podcast and everything. Talked to them recently, and they talk about how important branding is and how it's like really like it's telling a story, and there's like all these things that go into it. So like how much of your background in journalism, learning how to write and all that, and understanding that really helped you be successful on, you know, that marketing front and some of those roles? Because you would, like you said, you would have never thought like, okay, how can I be helpful here? Like, I'm not a developer, I'm not like in this tech scene maybe yet. So that was kind of like your foot in the door.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say like I've spent time thinking like, if I could go back and change it, would I have gone to grad school? And there's a part of me that's like no, but then at the same time it's like you can't like go and pick and choose moments of your life that you would go change without changing the path entirely. And I'm like, I'm actually really happy with where like I've got the student loans paid off, and I met my now wife while I was in grad school. She was at a different school, but like it's like all these sequences of events, and then I like happened to come across this video that inspired me, that led to me moving to San Francisco. So like if I had not gone to grad school and just moved to San Francisco and tried to find like break my way in, I'm sure there are beautiful things that could have played out, but I like there's no part of me that's like I wish that my path was different. But at the same time, I don't know. There is stuff that I learned, but I don't think I learned $100,000 worth of things from Northwestern in journalism program that like kind of carry through. It's like hard to kind of bifurcate what I had learned previously what was just like kind of innate to me in my kind of like draw toward storytelling, and then what I learned like sitting in classrooms in that master's program, and so I don't know, it's hard to say, but it definitely like the resume. I mean, like Northwestern's an impressive school. It's a well known journalism school, so like it definitely helped even in a totally different industry to just, especially because I went to University of Montana for undergrad, which no one's really heard of or familiar with, and I mostly went there to go snowboarding more than to learn anything. And so it definitely was like an element of just like a little bit of legitimacy on my resume that helped. And Northwestern has great like business and engineering programs, and so it is like kind of known in the tech community. And so even if I didn't study those things, it's like again, like now I'm not at the point probably where anybody like pays any attention to where I went to school, but for those first few years, it definitely was something that like when Jason hired me, I know he was excited about that specifically because it was like, oh, this is a technical person who knows kind of Silicon Valley and startups and has this journalism background, which really like kind of meshed well for the work that we were going to do.
I think something else too, like especially going back to kind of some of the higher education conversation is, and I've had this conversation with a few different people, is that like it's easy to say like, okay, does the value is the value that I got out of it worth obviously the dollars that went into it, and like one of the things that I think sometimes is not taken into account is probably a lot of the confidence maybe that you even got out of it in the early days that maybe you don't even realize. And that I think I can maybe even look back and say like, sometimes you look at it, based off of network. Sometimes the network is just good to kind of be around, gives you a little bit of clout, like you said. People kind of see some legitimacy around it, but like even gives you that little bit of confidence that maybe you need to know like, okay, hey, I went to like one of these schools, I kind of belong, certainly probably helps.
Yeah, totally. That's definitely true. But yeah, like when people will reach out to me occasionally, like friends of friends or family members or whatever, that are like, "Hey, I think I might go to journalism school. Should I do it?" And my answer is just like across the board, no, because it's like if you're going to take my path, then you just would have been better off like not doing it because you're not a journalist. And if you really want to be a journalist, it's actually a really bad idea to go to journalism school because then you're saddled with like no one that I went to school with is really working actively as a journalist, because it's like you suddenly set your like if you don't go take out all those massive student loans, and then you can actually work for peanuts and kind of like climb your way up as a journalist. But going to school for it is, even if you do learn a whole bunch of things, it's counterproductive in any area where like it's possible to break in without that degree, and where the kind of compensation is just so low that you're just going to be setting yourself back more than you're moving yourself ahead. But anyway, yeah, I don't regret it, but I don't think it helped me become a journalist.
Well, that first newsletter, I guess, kind of propelled you to, I guess, what you would call maybe like your first exit, right? And so, and you go work with Jason and everything. So I guess, one, do you stay in touch with Jason, and two, like, what was it like building with him?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it was very fun. I mean, he's and I don't know how familiar your listeners would be with him, but yeah, he's hilarious and blunt communicator, and we definitely had like a lot of heated disagreements over the years, but also became super close friends and spent a ton of time together. And now he's been the very first check into two of my companies, and so yeah, still like actively, I don't know, still keeping great touch, and I'm a huge fan, and he's a good friend, and has been definitely like one of the most kind of loyal supporters of me, basically from the day that I met him, for coming up on 10 years now. So yeah.
That's awesome. Very, very cool. So I guess, let's keep going down the path. So 2015, you're, I guess, still building inside, or you're working your way out of there. I guess what kind of came next in the journey?
Yeah, so I was there until 2019, and then I left to start a company called Capiche, which was essentially Glassdoor for SaaS pricing. So I was basically created this community for people to share how much they're paying for software, how they negotiated it, all the details down to the SKU level of their contracts. And because anyone who's ever bought software is familiar with, like, you see these, you click on pricing, and then you land on the pricing page, and there's no numbers on the entire page. It just says like contact us for a quote or whatever, or schedule a demo. And I was like, everyone knows, like, I know I have founder friends that I can just text and be like, yo, how much are you paying for Carta or for whatever, and I can learn about that, and they'll be like, oh, like we used this deal through the YC or I don't know, whatever. Like you get all the secrets of how they negotiated, and I thought instead of that happening one to one from like founders texting each other or that type of thing, like why not just expose it the same way Glassdoor did with compensation data? And yeah, so again, like I said, Jason was the first investor. And we didn't raise that much money. We built a really vibrant community. We pissed off all of the SaaS sellers. Like I would like get hit up in Twitter DMs where they're like either trying to fact check or just being like, "Can you please get this removed?" or whatever, because there's a reason for all that pricing opacity, which is that the sellers can really benefit from it. And so we struck a nerve and had a community that really valued the fact that we had facilitated all this. We didn't really figure out a great way to build a business out of it, and ended up sort of like it was almost like we were growing. The thing would grow, but the more energy we put into growing it didn't really impact. It's like if we took our hands off entirely, it would grow modestly, and if we put a ton of energy and money and time and resources into trying to grow it, it would also grow modestly. And so it was like kind of, I was not sure really what to do from that point. It was clear that we weren't on like some amazing rocket ship trajectory. And so ended up kind of with the team experimenting on some totally different products. We started like playing around with some podcasting tools and experimenting. And then in the meantime, this guy, Ryan New, who's the founder of a company called Vendr, which is a procurement platform based in Boston. Now they've raised $200 million, and they're kind of the leader in this category of like procurement platforms and negotiation as a service. And so he had built this business. At the time, it was like basically you hire Vendr to renegotiate all of your software contracts. And what he wanted to do was move toward actually like building data and building community around these things instead of just like the kind of brute force negotiation. And so he offered to acquire Capiche for cash and in a way that no one on the team had to join. And so we ended up doing that and kind of like using that as to re-up the cash for the bank. So we sold for 7 figures, and then we continued down that path, and we built this like we ended up what we built was called Racket, and it was the idea was to make it as easy to publish audio as it is to publish a tweet. So it was a totally web-based app. You go to racket.com, and once you have an account, like you just click record and you're recording, and then you can just share a link with anyone, kind of like the way that Riverside actually works today, except it was less about like the quality recording and helping people publish like a podcast and more about the distribution. So it was like you click, you can record for up to 9 minutes. You can invite friends in by just texting them the link. And then after 9 minutes, you just add a title, and then you've got a link that you can just share anywhere. So you don't have to like worry about going to distribute to iTunes or anything like that. And you can just talk and publish and be done. And no editing even like allowed really, because it was just like straight from voice to a link that you could share. And so that went viral for a while and grew very quickly. It ended up not really having much staying power. So I worked on it for a bit, and then ultimately ended up kind of deciding to return some cash to our investors and wind it down. And then I did go and join Vendr as VP growth, and spent much of last year working with them kind of on both the product and the marketing side.
Got it. And I guess before we go into like, some of the like the personal, just kind of like VC stuff that you've got involved with and everything, going from just like, your entire path, starting down the road of like journalism to your impact, just kind of like in the tech environment, and then building businesses. When it comes to like your, call it technical ability on certain things, right? Like, how do you view yourself, and what kind of skills did you maybe learn along the way once you maybe got out of a lot of that day to day from like what you knew in like the journalism environment? Like what kind of things did you develop? You're obviously like, you're a curious guy, like that's, undoubtedly. And like, obviously that's where people find the most benefit is like, if you're just continuously curious, asking a lot of questions, you're going to learn a lot of things. And in your situation, or in just kind of like your journey, you didn't start off as like a computer science engineer, right? Or anything. Like you weren't really, I would say your background wasn't like, hey, I was, writing code all the time. So like, what would you say, like, what does that technical ability look like now? How much of your time do you actually spend on that versus just like understanding how some of the products works and then iterating and relying on other folks around you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, Yeah, the curiosity is like the biggest thing, and then kind of the just like innate drive to just like figure out whatever it is, figure out how to get over whatever wall is in front of me, and because that forced a lot of it was like getting moving to Silicon Valley. I started to see like what can happen if you know how to build things, and that immediately pushed me to like figure out how to build them. So I was definitely fortunate. Like of any startup I could have joined, I joined one that was highly technical, as in I was the only non-technical person in the entire team. So I was surrounded by like amazing engineers who just were willing to kind of teach me a ton. And then my job was marketing to developers, and so I had to learn how to speak the language and start learning how to write code and all of those things. And so the curiosity has been huge, and I think it's like I am not an engineer, and my co-founder Dave, he's the CTO of Howie, and he's like the one who is breaking new ground. I make technical contributions, and I have a very, very clear understanding of like how the product works and why we and like the architecture decisions that we make and all of those things. But I'm not like spending my days writing code, and I wouldn't be the most useful person in that role. Um, but at the same time, I'm very comfortable with like the understanding all of it, and that I think is really huge because the it's very common for a non-technical person to want to build a technology company and have it in their minds that they don't actually need to know how the technology works or how to speak the language, and that it's just like that, like my bucket is these things and their bucket is these things. But it's like to build a technology company, you have to be really close to the technology, you have to understand it, and you have to be kind of the CEO has to be kind of the head of product, and to be the head of product, you have to have like a real understanding of the libraries that you're using, the way that you're architecting the app, the decisions that are being made, and just like the kind of the data structure and all those types of things are just super important. And so I definitely feel lucky that I got a ton of exposure to that, like kind of early in my career, that which then has just paid dividends in my ability to kind of continue to build on that, and to just like repeatedly be able to like figure the things out that I need to figure out, even if it's not that I'm like a useful software engineer. Like I would not be, if a company wanted to hire me as a software engineer, I would not be useful in that role. But at the same time, I am technical enough that I can that I can at least like be close to the product in a way that is definitely really valuable, and that I would advise pretty much anybody trying to get into tech and startups to go down that path, because it just is immensely helpful.
Yep. So let's talk about Howie for a minute. So this is the current product. This is what kind of you're all in on right now. I became familiar with you and got in touch with you really through using the product. Was very impressed. I was somebody that I'd never used Calendly or like any of these other scheduling kind of like tools. To me, they were, um, there were still like a lot of challenges kind of like built into them. And just like a lot of kind of manual, nature of kind of still checking things and all that. And then I got introduced to Howie. I can't actually remember how I came across it. I think it might have been on Twitter or X, but came across, or I might have even been listening to a podcast and heard it somewhere. I can't remember, but came across Howie. I got on the wait list, you know, got into the beta program and everything, and I've been using it now for I think about the last month or so, and it's been incredible. Love the product so far. I don't even think you guys are like fully live yet. I think you're still kind of like trickling folks in. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's been incredible. I tell everybody about it. Whenever I'm like talking to people, I'm like, oh yeah, this thing like has changed my life so far, and it's only been like 30 days. Like telling people they should check it out and everything. So give us the pitch on Howie. Tell us what it is, and give us a little more background on it, and why even you became passionate about building this and starting it.
Yeah, totally. So Howie is an email-based AI scheduling assistant, and so it's you when you sign up, then you suddenly have the option to CC Howie into any email thread that you want to, and when you do that, Howie will act as your executive assistant and offer times that you're available, and can dialogue back and forth with the person you're booking a meeting with to, if they're like, oh, I'm out of office this week, can you share some times the next week, whatever. And it can work with a lot of your preferences about when you want meetings to take place, buffer times, like giving you additional buffer around flights and things like that. Um, and then it will obviously, like once someone selects a time, then it will create the calendar invite and set up the Zoom and all of that, and can handle rescheduling. So all the things that a great executive assistant does around scheduling meetings and moving meetings and all of that, we've tried to build kind of software that does that. And yeah, we're like about 250 days in from the first lines of code, so definitely just getting started. And the reason we just, I mean, well, so my co-founder Dave, he and I worked together about 10 years ago at a company that he co-founded called Assembly, that was backed by Union Square Ventures and Thrive Capital. And Dave was the CTO. I was doing, again, kind of developer evangelism, and we became really close. He's like a kind of textbook 10x engineer, just phenomenal problem solver, and moves very fast, and has a really amazing ability to kind of think about the technical challenges of any product. And we had over the years kind of thought about working together. And so after that company Assembly, Dave and I spent some time prototyping this kind of Slack-based AI assistant that it was fully a human in the loop. So it was like you add this bot to Slack, and then anytime you send a message to it, a team that we were staffing up would get the message, and it could be like, order us lunch or something. And then like a person on our end would respond and like give you options for lunch. And we ended up not pursuing it because the margins were really, really tricky, and a lot of just complication. But anyway, so last summer we obviously were both playing with large language models and with AI, and excited about it as a sort of paradigm shift that's happening like before our eyes. And we started with the question of like, can we actually build the AI version of what we had tried to build before, like an executive assistant that does everything that a great EA does, but is fully artificial intelligence? And we pretty quickly came to the conclusion that the answer to that question is actually no. We saw 10 or 20 companies that have raised money on the promise of building that, but we felt like it's way too broad, because having spent a bunch of time with this technology, it's like, yes, you can throw anything at an LLM and you'll get a response, but in order to actually control the inputs and the outputs and get a consistent, accurate response that you want, you have to really narrow in on a much smaller problem than all the things an EA does, like travel booking and managing your calendar and ordering lunch, and like there's endless kind of things, contract review, or helping you manage your inbox. And so we felt like all of those problems on their own, any one of them could be something, even with where AI is today and where it's going to be within kind of the foreseeable next couple of years, you could spend years just trying to solve any one of those problems. And if you try to solve them all, you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot from the beginning. So we started to think like, well, then what problem would be an interesting one to solve? And scheduling kind of immediately made sense to us, because it's a very frequent use case for professionals of all kinds across industries. And that's always important if you want to build a product that actually like kind of has repeat usage and stays top of mind for people. It's a tedious task that like nobody is going to be mad about robots taking it away from humans. Like even executive assistants that I talk to are like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like you're saying that there's a future where I just won't have to do like meeting booking and setting up calendar invites. And so nobody is like upset about it kind of getting outsourced to computers. And then a really key part of it is it has sort of distribution built in. So every time you use Howie to book a meeting with someone, they see Howie. And we're very subtle. It's not like we put a link or any like big advertisement for Howie, but it's fast. It responds really quickly every time. And when it gets everything right and responds very quickly, then suddenly after a couple of those interactions, someone is like, what is this? Can I get that? And so that's why our waitlist has kind of ballooned in this beta, is that distribution that's built in. So and there's like a kind of a meme in tech that like first time founders focus on product and second time founders focus on distribution. And I mean, I think we really are living in both of those things, like, and you kind of have to, but definitely it was important to me that if I was going to go take another swing, like if I was going to do this, I really wanted to understand that there's a clear path to distribution where the thing, if we execute on product, where it will just grow organically and can become very large. And so this again made a lot of sense in that regard. So that got us excited enough to kind of start prototyping. I spent a bunch of time interviewing high-end executive assistants as well as the executives they work for to just understand like the whole conversation would be focused on the calendar. So it's like, what do you do for this person's calendar? And it was exciting because we learned that a lot of time is spent on the meeting booking and some of those things like what Howie does today. And then B, all of the other things beyond just booking meetings felt like things that we actually could expand into, because it's about like understanding the what a productive day and week is for a person and the context switching that is like ideal for them, or which types of meetings are kind of energy giving versus energy draining, and transit times needed between in-person meetings, and like color coding of the calendar, and like how to kind of prioritize when you need to reschedule which types of meetings can move and which can't move, and like how you handle the nuance of like, I don't take meetings before 9 a.m., but if it's important and matches these parameters, then actually I can. You just have to check with me first because I like have to coordinate school drop off for my kids or whatever. And as we learned all those things, it was like, okay, it's really clear actually that like the Calendly booking link concept has been, I mean, Calendly's been around 12, 13 years. There's a dozen other companies that do these booking links. And so lots of very smart, creative people have worked on that space. And my belief is that it's pushed to the ceiling. Like we've reached the ceiling of what booking links can do. And we felt like the MVP of Howie that we could get out relatively quickly in a matter of months would be almost on par with that ceiling, but that's like the floor of what it can do. And it's like, if you can start to do all these other things that, again, busy executives say that they just literally get hours added to their week by having a smart person do this. And so the question for us is like, can we build software that does all of that for orders of magnitude less than $100,000 executive assistant? And we immediately, or pretty quickly, kind of felt like the answer was yes. And so we started building, and here we are.
Yeah, I have a incredible EA right now called Howie for $18 a month, and it's fantastic. And super excited about kind of the capabilities that you guys still have on the future. I mean, I think the big thing that you hit on is that like you're starting basically at the top of what the technology that's been developed before can do. So it's an exciting time. In um, in this period of time, there's this rush into AI. There's tremendous amount of focus. Everybody's trying to kind of rush there, figure out what things they can do, what kind of output they can get from it. What are your biggest, I would say, so two things. What are your biggest challenges? What are the things that you're facing, I guess, just with the development of Howie? And two, what are the things that maybe you're paying attention to, just kind of like more broader market driven things? Like, are you seeing any potential for incumbents, anybody that's starting to compete with you in this space at all?
Well, okay. Yeah, actually, okay. So challenges, most of the work that we've spent the last 250 days on is not building like features and functionality. It's just getting the thing to not screw up, to correctly parse the correct data out and send the correct response back. And that is even with how mind-blowingly good ChatGPT is and LLMs are, it's and how much you can kind of get for free from using those models. It still is very hard technically to actually do this, because there are just so many ways that it can fail. There are a lot of dates and times in an email thread that are not referencing the actual meeting. There are a lot of just edge cases in the way that we all schedule meetings, new people being added to the thread, or like things in people's email footer. Like a random example is like, we initially were trying to parse out where a person is. If there was if you had said, I'm on the East Coast in the email, then we would like assign that time zone to you to make it easier for you. But then we found like a customer who's on the East Coast, but her email footer said San Francisco because that's where the headquarters of her company is. And it was like, it had like their company address or whatever. And so all of her meetings were end up like, it was scheduling everything on Pacific time for her and assigning that time zone to her over and over. And that's like one of, I don't know, 1,000 examples so far that we've found of just edge cases that can throw the system off. And so that's been the work for us, is just solve those things and figure out the architecture of the application that's going to make it kind of self-reinforcing and to where it constantly gets better. And so before we started onboarding customers, we tried to figure out if there was a way to kind of simulate this. We looked for, well, we tried to use GPT to like play guest and host and see if it could find edge cases. It did do some really creative things, like one person's like on ayahuasca for the next 20 days, and it's like, what do you do in that scenario, because they, you won't be able to schedule. But it didn't find the real ones that we were going to be running into. And then we looked for like actual scheduling emails, and the what we found was that the Enron case from whenever it was 25 years ago, all of the emails from Enron as a company are publicly available because of that case, and a huge subset of them is executive assistants scheduling meetings. And so we tried to like train on that, and still didn't run into the right problems, because what you have there is like the content of the emails, but it's missing the calendar data and the kind of moments in time of like how people are actually interacting with Howie. And so ultimately we found that it was like pretty much impossible to solve these things without the product being live. So in February, we started onboarding customers, and when we did that, Howie was screwing up about 25% of the time. So that's pretty bad for an executive assistant. And we quickly though started to uncover the most common edge cases, and have like been able to jump on those. And so it's like the real usage has been what has helped us kind of build this curve and rethink the decisions we made when we were building this thing without anyone kind of using it. And so now we have like a whole new level of clarity where I mean, today we're not even close to satisfied with how he performs on a day-to-day basis. Where it's like to the point that a lot of people are happy with it, but we have a big wait list, and we're not like actively dumping tons of people in, because we can see some pretty big steps forward that we're kind of working on right now that are going to make a big difference. And so in terms of challenges, that's where the real challenges are. There's like features and functionality and cool things that we can build that allow Howie to like we have this weekly briefing that you get that is kind of useful. It's like we could spend a bunch more time making that more useful, but the hard problem that we think will differentiate us from anyone else who tries to build in this space is the natural language processing and the ability to handle nuance and edge cases and always respond in the right way. And that's been a big process, and there's not proven best practices in this because it's all so new. And so that's some of the challenges. And then you asked about like incumbents and kind of competition. I think we've also felt good about where we are, because like about the competitive risk for incumbents because of some of those challenges I just talked through. So if I'm right, which I at this point I'm pretty confident about, that the only way to make a product like this work really well is to actually ship it to users and let it fail in real scenarios. If that's correct, because like you could argue that maybe a group of PhDs in a dark room could actually solve this with no real users, but I don't think that's actually possible. So if I'm right about that, then that means a company like Google or Calendly that has an established brand and a ton of revenue and real paying customers and all of these kind of brand risks would have to ship a product that's going to fail 25% of the time. And like for us, that really sucked. We had people paying us to use this product, and it failed, and it makes me sick to my stomach every time that Howie fails. But like I at least can grit my teeth through it. And an incumbent brand it's much harder for them to do that. And so there's a really cool kind of advantage there where it's just like, can you actually power through that phase and to emerge with something that works incredibly well, or do you have to just keep leaning on the thing that's always worked, which again is still working? Calendly is a thriving business as far as I can tell, and Google recently added Calendly functionality to GCal, and so I don't think it's like a zero sum thing where it's like we either win and Calendly loses or the other way around or something like that. But I overall am not and have felt like we have a pretty clear path in front of us, and it's kind of our game to lose if we're right that a product like this is going to be successful, then we got the timing right. We have what we believe is the right kind of talent composition to actually go to market and build this type of thing. And so we feel really good about where we are, which again doesn't mean that I'm like that it's like we're going to destroy Calendly or something. Like it's not. It doesn't have to be zero sum in that way, but I just don't worry too much about incumbents kind of jumping into this, especially because by the time that it's clear that it's really working, we will really have a pretty meaningful jump in terms of some market share and a lot of that kind of reinforced learning. And so there is some point where we will have sort of like escape velocity, and I think by the time it's like that obvious that this is a product worth building to an incumbent, then ideally we like have that escape velocity by that point.
It's interesting because the expectation is, I think maybe from the general public, for maybe folks that aren't really too entrenched in like the mechanics of the technology, AI and everything, like they have these really high expectations for it, which I think makes your job even, that much harder sometimes, when you're obviously having to manage expectations. And then when you have other folks that are like, we get how hard this is, like this is really cool, like you're literally having a machine completely, do what, humans were doing for forever, that expectation level versus the reality is something that I think, must be hard to manage. Why Howie?
So we thought through a ton of different names, and we spent a lot of time kind of building this list. We wanted something where we could get the either the .com or the .ai domain for it, and we wanted, from talking to a lot of potential customers, it was clear that we needed a name that would kind of pass as a human name. People didn't want something that like was, I don't know, like schedule bot or something like that. Like it just wouldn't work in the way that people want to use a product like this. And so we knew it had to be like a human passing name. And but some of the ones we considered were not names that we've ever like encountered a person with, but it was like names that at least like we thought maybe could theoretically be, if you saw it on an email, you wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, this is like schedule bot, whatever. So we had a list, and Paul Graham has this really good kind of rubric that I can send you the link to about names, and I've always used that through several businesses that I've named, and one of them is brevity. It's like just if the shorter the better. Another one is, I think he calls it pronounceability. I can't remember exactly, but it's like if I say it to you, just my company's called Howie, and then someone else pops up and asks you, how is that spelled? Like, would you be able to get it right? Because word of mouth is so important. And so it's like, if you have a complicated name that is very confusing from when you hear it in conversation to translate that to typing it into a browser, then like, that's not great. And then there's another one around like ownability. It's like, are there incumbent companies using this name? Is it like a word that you could theoretically kind of own from a brand perspective? And Howie, obviously there's like famous people named Howie, but it was like kind of wide open in that regard. And then for us, it was like we wanted something that seemed friendly. And so anyway, Howie ended up randomly on the list, and then we had a list of like 40 names, and we just kept kind of like moving the ones that we didn't love as much off, and just narrowing down, and eventually we were pretty set on Howie, and then negotiated the domain purchase for Howie.ai, and here we are.
Nice. Well, I love Howie. I love what you guys are doing. I love what's happening in the AI space. Howie, like I said, has changed my life. So hope more and more people check it out. I appreciate you sharing the time with me today, Austin. This has been awesome. And hopefully I convince you to come back on, in the future when you guys got a few more months behind you and stuff. And like I said, looking forward to see what comes of Howie.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, this has been really fun. And yeah, I would love to come back and do it again sometime.
Awesome, man. Austin, good luck. And hopefully we'll talk soon.
Cool. Thanks, Pablo. See ya.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Roads and Riches podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting. Let us know how we're doing. And if you're an individual or a business that's in need of accounting services, maybe you're in the market for a new CPA, whether it be tax, accounting, fractional CFO services for your business, or transaction advisory services if you're contemplating a transaction, you should consider using Alpine Mar, the CPA firm that's redefining the accounting industry. You can head on over to alpinemar.com or roadsandriches.com to learn more about us and find a contact form to get in touch. Find out if we can be a good fit for you. We'll see you next time on the Roads and Riches Pod.